An article here describes the experience of 16th and 17th century Spanish voyagers along ocean routes to the Americas and East Asia. It was my intention to do a brief video on just that, but then things went off on a tangent. More on that in a minute. To start our brief story, let's turn back the clock to around the year 1000. It was then that the Norse are believed to have become the first Europeans to discover the Americas. They established settlements in present-day Greenland, an island on the North American continent and now a constituent country of the Kingdom of Denmark, and in present-day Newfoundland, an island now part of Canada. Now let's fast forward to the 15th century. For several hundred years, Europeans could trade with Asian countries by traveling east, across land and water routes called the Silk Road. However, with the fall of Constantinople, capital of the Christian Byzantine Empire, to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, Christian access across Islamic territory became far more difficult. So in 1492, in search of a western sea route to Asia, Christopher Columbus and his crews made the first of 4 trips across the Atlantic. They became, after the Norse 5 centuries before them, the next Europeans to land in the Americas, this time around the Caribbean. It is here that I was going to describe the galleons on which many of these voyagers traveled, and their living conditions during their months-long journeys. However, thinking back to my childhood when I learned that Columbus thought he'd landed in Asia, I asked myself, shouldn't he have known he couldn't possibly have traveled that far? That tangent I mentioned at the beginning? This is it. As I mentioned, for centuries Europeans had been traveling eastward over land and sea to the Far East, and so they should have been able to estimate the distance, at least roughly. Now, the first person ever to estimate the circumference of the Earth was an ancient Greek named Eratosthenes, who, in the 3rd century BC, calculated it as about 25,000 miles, pretty close to the modern value of 24,901. The way he did this was really creative, and a simplified description of his method is this. Along the Tropic of Cancer, a latitude of about 23.5 degrees north of the equator, the sun passes directly overhead on the summer solstice, generally around June 21st. On that day, at that latitude, a pole stuck in the ground would have no shadow at exactly noon when the sun was directly overhead. About 500 miles north, however, a pole stuck in the ground would have a shadow angle of just over 7 degrees. Using some relatively basic trigonometry, Eratosthenes calculated that because this angle is about 1/50th the circumference of a circle, the circumference of the Earth would be 50 times 500 miles, or about 25,000 miles. Now, I'd like to think Columbus could have taken the circumference, subtracted the distance traveling east, and estimated the time required to sail west. But instead of examining Columbus's reasoning, or lack thereof, for thinking he'd landed in East Asia, I'll end the story here. I'll treat this as a tribute to the ancient Greek thinker who, with a few simple tools, some basic trigonometry, and a lot of creativity, fairly accurately calculated the circumference of the Earth. Have a great day.